computer. There we go. Is there anything else I need to do? No, I don't think so. So, welcome. Here we are, week 3. We're going to talk about the Grand Tableau a little bit today, which I have been reading about this week. I'm curious, has anyone done any readings or any interesting Lenormand related juiciness this week?
Yeah, I did a reading yesterday and it was like on the nose. Like,
Ooh.
had I looked for the cards in the deck that would have basically perfectly encapsulated my situation, it would have been those 3. And I've been reading tarot long enough that I should know better by now, but I'm still often shocked by the synchronicity of things. Like, I kind of went into it as a hopeful skeptic, not quite sure if I could trust in this process. And so even now, 15 years in, it's the serendipity and synchronicity of the cards is often kind of uncanny. So yeah, that was pretty, it was a good reassurance. Like I said, I shouldn't need it at this point, but it's still nice to have.
I feel that. I mean, every time I sit down to do a reading, I'm terrified that everything I've been able to do is going to not work anymore. And when I finish a reading, I inevitably will text Liz and say, "Oh my God, is tarot so cool?" um, so, so I totally feel that. It's pretty amazing. And I'm innately a skeptic too. So like the fact that I do this, I think is sort of such a strange thing.
Right.
Because I don't believe in things. So, anyone else have a reading experience this week? Yeah, Whitney?
I did a reading yesterday. I was trying to do more of a predictive reading. The cards that came out encapsulated like what's going on currently, but I couldn't tell what's going to come. Like the question was, what's going to happen in this meeting? And I couldn't get that answer.
Did you go through the meeting then and
the meetings? I did the then I did the pairings and I did mirroring. I mean, everything matches what's going on currently, but I couldn't figure out what's going to happen.
Did anything shift during the actual meeting or did things stay the same?
Oh, the meeting is not scheduled, so it's supposed to occur next week.
Oh, got it. Okay, that makes sense. I'm curious to see whether nothing happens in the reading. I mean, in the meeting, like maybe the reading was saying what's going to happen is the same thing that has been happening. I don't know if that's contextually possible, but
I hope not. We'll see next week, so I'll be able to tell everyone on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm curious. Anyone else?
I've been doing a little bit of it in conjunction with the tarot, and with Lenormand tends to be what I go to for when I don't trust tarot to just be mean. And so, like, for yes or no questions, I'll go to Lenormand instead of tarot, because tarot, I feel like it sends me on a whole journey, and I'm like, well, I just wanted to know what's going on. So the big thing I'm finding is that I tend to not want to do as much work with Lenormand than I will with tarot. Like tarot, I'll do like a 15 card spread and have a great time with it. But if I'm asking a yes or no question with Lenormand, I'm trying to push myself to actually go through the pairings and everything instead of just being like, well, it's red. And or it's black, so therefore it's yes and therefore it's no. So I'm trying to push myself to actually, it's something I noticed about myself because I definitely love to overcomplicate tarot. So I'm finding it interesting that with Lenormand I'm actually wanting to keep things simple. It's a nice like self-observation.
I share that.
Oh, you do? Yeah, Nancy, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
No, I absolutely share that. I haven't done any readings yet. I'm going to start this week, but I tend to use tarot as I like you said, I overcomplicate it. I love to put all these different associations and correlations, and I do all this introspective self-development stuff, and then I want to use this. I'm not a predictive reader, like I'm not a fortune teller. And with this, I'm like, you know what? This is going to be my predictive fortune telling medium. And I'm just going to use it much more literally and just simply boom, boom, boom. Here's your answer, you know?
I think that's what I was going to say is I think that's why Lenormand kind of hit when it did. You know, and that was in a weird way, kind of my reaction to it was negative because I felt like we as a culture had overcomplicated tarot and that tarot was just doing what we asked it to. And so all the videos back 10, 15 years ago, or books were like, well, tarot's too mushy and overcomplicated and too spiritual. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's what we've been doing. So a lot of my mission over the past few years has been undoing that. But I get the longing for something clearer and cleaner and less sort of fraught, So I understand why that happened for sure.
I feel like too, and it's something new. It's easier to come at it with a beginner's mind and not overcomplicate it because you're still learning. So you're in the process of unpacking meaning rather than if you've been working with tarot for a while, you've engaged with those complexities, you've looked at the nuance. So it's hard almost not to incorporate that every time you pull out a deck of cards, for me at least. So it's nice with Lenormand because it's fresh and it's something I'm not familiar with. So I still have to reference the meanings. And so it's easier to simplify it in that context rather than, going to town on it the way I do with tarot. I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
Definitely.
I keep telling myself that I give myself 6 months before I somehow try to throw Kabbalah on top of it. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I know I'm going to try.
I was just looking at a deck. I was going through all my Lenormand decks recently, and there's the mystical Lenormand has like. Do you notice I say it different every time? It cracks me up. I have a friend who doesn't know whether scallops should be pronounced scallops or scallops, and so she'll always say it twice, one way each. I think it's regional, like in sort of
that one I can answer. It's scallops.
Well, I was just about to say, I think scallops is very eastern New England, very eastern Massachusetts, and scallops is very western mid Massachusetts. So for Liz being way out east, that makes sense. I don't know where my thought was going before that, but just the mystical Lenormand has like astrological symbols and stuff on it. So I always joke that if the Golden Dawn had found Lenormand, then they would have associated it with the 36 decans and all that stuff. And there are people who do, have more mystical or esoteric associations for it, for sure. I was just reading, I want to share this too. I was just reading this book this week. This is the Andy Boroveshengra book. Why does it do this? It's so dumb. Let me turn off my blur. It's called 36 Cards by Andy I was practicing the pronunciation. I want everyone to know this. Boroveshengra. And why I thought this was interesting for a few reasons. One is they do talk a little bit about astrology in the back. But he reads the Grand Tableau without houses. He doesn't really use houses at all, which, because we were using houses last week, I thought was interesting. He also has a kind of Middle European way of reading the card insets. Traditionally, as I've learned, the spades, for example, are usually the suit, a negative suit. They represent knives. He talks about how in parts of Europe and Middle Europe, they are not negative at all. They are they represent shields and nobility, and so they're actually a positive suit. So it's interesting to sort of see how different things have contributed to the meanings of things over time, and also just again, we've kind of talked the last 3 weeks about kind of people who claim to do everything right, and there's no right way because everyone does it differently, and everyone's done just making it up as they go along, really. So just to kind of reconfirm the idea that we find our access point to something, and that's how we go, you know what I mean? So I do think that Lenormand benefits from simplicity. I think it benefits from not focusing too much on the image. But beyond that, I think sort of the access point for you is the access point. Liz, what are your best?
I think what you've been saying in this class all along is, the bottom line is, does the querent walk away with an answer to their question?
Yeah.
Do they feel like, okay, I that was helpful?
100%. That's to me the barometer of success. That they got the answer, even if they don't like the answer, that they got the answer, because there are going to be times where they don't like the answer, and more often than not, probably because life is annoying, especially lately. So All right, let me clear the decks here. I have so much stuff on my desk. My office is chaos. I'm very miserable in it, so I need to clean it. But I don't see myself doing that anytime soon, so I'm just going to continue to suffer needlessly. All right, so I'm going to join this from my iPad too, because I want to be able to sort of share. I did some samples slides for us, but I want to be able to share and draw on them so we can kind of talk through things together. So this is the one that's happening today. I may have to do some editing on this. All right, so now what I want to do is share my screen. All right, can you all still hear me, by the way? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, now I want to just put my iPad on Do Not Disturb. And I want to go over to Procreate. All right, so I've done some samples. So there's basically two versions of the Lenormand spread. I'm doing two things at once and it's confusing me. So there's this one, which is probably the most typical one, the one people are used to seeing. So this is called the 8x8+4. Can everyone see this? Cool. So this is the most common one, and this is what it looks like with the houses. So we can see it's basically just the cards in order. So that's version 1. The reason I think that this is beneficial, this version, is that if you are working with houses, it actually lets you have a full square around the man house and the woman house, which in the other version you don't get. So I think, like for example, if we're concerned about what's in the house of the woman and we want to do like a full 9 cards around it, we don't get that with the other version. So I think that that's really why this one's most popular, because it gives you for both cases full sort of 9 cards around each of those houses. By the way, these slides are up on my website too for anyone at home, or for all of you if you want to reference these. They're definitely on the website. The other version is 9x4. This is the one that I sort of feel like my own brain kind of intrinsically prefers, just because of its sort of, I don't know what the word is, it's symmetry. But when you look at the house of the man and the woman, they actually don't have full squares around them. So they end up being right here, and you don't really get anything but what's above it. And in the case of the woman, what's to the right of it. So it really is a matter of preference. It doesn't really matter which one you use. I think, it's just a matter of kind of what feels good and whether or not you care if you have a full sort of 9 cards box around the houses. So thoughts, questions so far? Easy peasy. All right. So what I did beyond this was I have 2 things we're going to look at today. I did some, we're going to start without worrying about the houses. But then we're going to look at the houses too. So these are like not the prettiest slides I've ever done, because I tried to actually put cards in these, but they were just too small. You couldn't see what they were. So I did this with words, which I guess is a good example of why you don't really need the images, because what matters is the idea or the symbol. We'll get to that. What we're going to do now is we're actually just going to look at 2 versions of the Grand Tableau and just kind of read through it together and sort of see what we see. So this this is just one I took a picture of before. This is the 4x8+4. And so here are a few techniques, and basically all the techniques that we talked about last week, you can use in the Grand Tableau, and then there are others too. So a few things I'll share to start with is, one thing that's really common is to sort of begin with the first 3 cards as kind of a theme or a message. So a lot of people will just sort of start there and say, okay, the first three cards represent a theme or a message for the reading, and that's where I start. Some people will limit it to the first card. You don't really use one card in Lenormand, so I don't know. It's really up to you. But generally, and in a lot of books that I've read, it's common to sort of look at the first three cards and say, what's our theme? And we'll look through this in a couple ways as we go through today, and we'll see how far we get. But we want to think of this in terms of both answering a question and as a general spread. There are kind of two ways to approach the reading. So that's the first thing that people do. Another thing that people do that's common after that is to then read the corners. So they'll look at 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they sort of read those 4 cards together. So in this case, they would read fox, tree, bear, and flowers. So that's the kind of next thing that will happen, is to read the corners traditionally. And then I think depending on the kind of reading we're doing, the next thing is to locate the significator cards. So if we're reading, and I will say that when I get decks now that have, like, a lot of decks now will have 2 men and 2 women cards, I will just usually leave the 2 men in, or the 2 women, and not worry about gender. But it's up to you. When I do that, when I have 2 of the same card, I'll usually put like a big dot on the one that represents the self, and then leave the other one without that. But so if we're reading for someone and we're using the man card as a significator, we would locate that. And then if we were using the woman card as a significator, we'd locate that. But also what we would do, if we're especially in a relationship reading, is we would look at where the cards land in relationship to each other. So in this reading, they're actually connected in this row. So there aren't any intersections. And proximity is the thing that happens a lot in the grand tableau too. So these cards, relatively close to each other in the same row. But if, for example, the woman were down here where the bear is, there would be a lot of distance. So if this were the woman, then what we would want to do is like look at where the cards intersect. So let's say the woman were down here, then we would look at kind of the relationship to where the cards rows intersect. So in that case, they would intersect at the lilies and the mountain. So those are like beginning techniques to start with in terms of reading the reading. I think, this deck is such a product of its time. I think, you know what I mean? That like, I think the things people cared about, most immediately were like, like, when will I get married and when will I die? And I also feel like death was such a more immediate thing in the past, in the sense that it was kind of always around. And, in modern life, we've really kind of homogenized it to the point where, death happens sort of behind the scenes. I talk about this a lot, there's a great YouTuber, Ask a Mortician, Caitlin Doty, who has great videos about this stuff. Love her books, love her channel. But I think, in the past, I don't know, I feel like death would sort of be less shocking somehow. So those are like the beginnings of the techniques. And then some other things that are possible in common is to kind of look at the diagonals between a significator, and so there's like that as a possibility. So like the diagonals can be interesting in connecting the cards relationships. Knighting is another thing. So that's like going 2 over and down, 2 over and up, 1 over and 2 down, just that chess move sense of, all of these. So in this case, the man knights to the rider and to the book. The woman knights to the mice and to the bear. And so, that can give you information about the reading too. One of the things though, that's like, even as I'm talking about this, it feels super, like there's just so much to do. And I think that that's why even in tarot or other forms of divination, you can kind of get overwhelmed by all the options, all the things that are possible. And what
Can
I've,
Sorry,
yes,
sorry, Betty.
yeah,
So that I've never done a grand tableau. I've read about it, I've heard about
Mhm.
it, but I think to myself, how do you do this?
Yeah.
Like, it just seems like there's endless things you can be saying and looking at, and
Yeah.
that could take days.
It could, and I think it depends a lot on the person and the situation. And that's exactly where I wanted to get to, which is like you don't need to do any or all of these things. What you want to do is sort of get to what we were talking about earlier, which is like getting the answer to the question. And so you only need the tools that are going to help you achieve that. You can use this as sort of a check-in on various areas. And that's kind of the first thing that we'll look at today. But you can also use it as a way of answering a specific question. And in that case, you may not, in both cases, really, you may not need to even look at all the cards. So actually, I said we were going to do like a general. Let's actually start by doing a relationship reading, because I think that that's sort of one of the easiest ways to contextualize things. So let's just say, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we covered this last week. How would I know that when I would need to use a 3-card versus a 5-card versus a 9-card versus a grand tableau?
It's really a preference thing. It depends on how much information you feel like you want or need. I like with Lenormand, I like a 5-card as a minimum, and my go-to with every system is 9. But it really is about what you kind of want out of the situation in that moment. The grand tableau, to me, is like it feels like a good general thing when you want to look at a lot of different things and check in a lot of different areas. But it can be used for a single question, just by exploring what the relationships to the cards are. So it's kind of a convoluted answer, I guess, but it really is just what do you feel like working with that day?
Okay.
To me, like the reason why I'm interested in Lenormand is the grand tableau, because it feels like such a unique thing, and other systems that use it, like Kipper, kind of just use the Lenormand houses and setup. So it seems particularly well suited to this system. So that was why I started exploring it. And I think like contextualizing in the sense of let's do a relationship reading is like a good way to start, because we'll see what we want to look at, what we don't need to look at, what gives us information, and what really doesn't, if that makes sense. So it's probably better to start there than as a general spread. So let's say we have a querent who wants to know if they are due for any romance in the coming year. Let's actually say 6 months, because I think readings have a better shelf life of 6 months. So what I would do is I would sort of begin by figuring out which significator I'm gonna use. Let's just, for the sake of this reading, use the man card as the significator, and the woman to represent a significant other of some kind. So just for our sake, we know the man card is here, and we know the significant other card is here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start sort of with the cards and their relationships to each other. So this querent wants to know if there's a relationship sort of on the horizon for them in the coming year. So there's a lot of different things to start with. We can sort of go wherever we have an impulse. We could do kind of the 9-card box around him to get a sense of kind of where he is now. We also have the woman card, the significator card, actually has a 9-card box around them too. So that's one thing we could do. Another thing that would be common, is to look at the space between them. So really, I think where this gets intimidating is sort of like, where do I start? And I think like anything else, you just kind of have to trust your instinct, and have a plan going in. So just let me throw this out there, like, to any of you, like what would you say seems like the best place to start in this case? Anyone have a thought?
I think because the question is focusing on, is something coming up on the horizon for this person? I think the first thing would be to look at what's going on in the 9 card box around them, just see what's going on in their orbit. Because if we immediately see something like, I see the cross there, it seems that the fox is there going on. So maybe they have more pertinent issues going on in their life that are impeding this potential romantic progress.
Great. All right, that's a good start. So let's start there. So this just takes us back to the 9 card that we talked a little bit about last week. Everyone has a different way of reading it, but you can read it however you want to. The Grand Tableau is really a series of mini readings, like any other large spread. And so what we're doing is kind of getting a sense of chunks of the reading. So here we have the man. In the top row, we have the fox, the ring, and the dog. In the man's row, we have the ship, the man, and the fish. And then we have the cross, the star, and the sun. So then we would just start interpreting, I think, sort of row by row, column by column, just to get a sense of where we are. I think because proximity is so common in Lenormand, I probably kind of begin with, these 3, because this is sort of where the man is. So we don't have a lot of context. We just have someone who we know wants to be in a relationship and is asking if there's potential for that in the next 6 months. So the man is surrounded by the ship and the fish. So after the last 3 weeks, we've talked a lot about different meanings. It's going to be different for everybody. Just to sort of refresh, if you're coming into this for the first time, if you're watching this later, ship traditionally means movement, travel, shipping. It's fairly slow. The fish usually represents money, liquid, fluidity. And so, let's start by just interpreting these 3 cards. How would we describe the man's situation using these cards? What do you think?
Is 34 meant to be fish?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just a little hard to see for me.
Yeah, no worries. Yep, it's boat or ship, man, and fish in that row.
So, sorry, I'm going to mute myself because my dog's barking.
No, you're about to say, don't worry about the dog. Say what you're going to say.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, I'm seeing the ship to me is meaning traveling. And I'm looking at the fish, and one of the meanings for the fish can be community and abundance. So I'm thinking maybe it's going to involve some traveling, some moving around, and finding a new community of folks to be with. Maybe he's too boxed in to too small a community where he is right now, and that's going to limit his ability to meet someone.
Great. That's great interpretation. Anyone have any other ideas?
To me, it also seems like he could be venturing outside of that community.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on how we interpret those cards. Like, to me, it seems like what I'm seeing, and it's just because, this was where my mind was with the fish, always sort of, even as much as I try to sort of think about things other than the meanings I learned, I'm like, well, this is a person who's sort of moved into a pretty stable financial situation. Like, he in life right now is sort of feeling kind of financially good, you know what I mean? But I think in this case, what you've done by talking about community is important because context is always so key, right? And that's where I think people get stuck in these kinds of readings, because we don't think about what we're really talking about in this case, which is, will I find a relationship? And so the fish as a community or a school of people makes a lot of sense contextually, because we're talking about relationships, right? So why wouldn't we use that version of the fish here? So for sure. That's great. All right, so we sort of know that now. There's a sense of like moving towards community, or maybe needing to shake up a community, find a new community. So let's now kind of go in the other direction and we'll look at these cards. So we kind of handle the cross above and below him. So we have ring, man, and star. I mean, the ring is always a card you want to look for when you're talking about relationships. I can't help but notice that the ring is connected to the card of friendship. You know what I mean? Even though we're not really looking at that relationship right now, but there's that. And then, so I just, that was the thing that popped into my head. It's probably going to be relevant in some way. But so we have the ring and the star connected to the man. What do we, how do we interpret that?
I feel like all of the cards that are in this quadrant are really supportive and positive. I mean, maybe the fox, not so much. It could be some underlying, but if you're looking at the cross or just the up and down, right? You've got the ring, which signifies commitment. You've got the star, which is a really hopeful outcome. Even if you spread out from there, like there's a friendship signified by the dog. So that kind of feels like a friendship that's based in common values, beliefs, understanding, camaraderie, not just like a romantic spark. There's a sense of community with the fish, with the cross. Like, I think in the context of this reading, that almost feels like a reinforcement of that sense of common beliefs and values. And the sun is, I'm so new to this that I'm kind of looking at everything in that quadrant, not the up and down that you're talking about. But none of those cards outside of maybe the fox, which is maybe proceed with caution, seem particularly negative or pessimistic in terms of the approach. I mean, there is the 3 black cards on the left if you're looking at color, but on a whole, it seems to be fairly positive in the approach.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the fox and the cross are the only like quote unquote negative cards, and we don't have to sort of see them that way contextually for sure.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel like fox gets a bad rap.
Well, there's a rigidity to the way that the cards are usually read. Like the fox is sinister. It, in what I was reading this morning, it always means wrong. So there are positive times where the fox can mean like a wrong diagnosis, so you're diagnosed incorrectly. But the thing, that's common is that it always, like there are cards that are always negative and always positive and always neutral. And the fox is considered negative. It's also in the suit of clubs, which is considered negative. And what I didn't notice, but what I read this morning is that all the really negative cards, quote unquote, are clubs. So fox, mice, cross, mountain, snake, bear, clouds, I think. But again, it's just this. I mean, there's a lot to sort of like take in. So I guess is the point there. So if we're looking at the suits, for sure. But anyway, the point of that was the fox. I don't necessarily think the fox needs to be negative all the time because I think of the fox as crafty, clever. So there's an aspect of that there too. But let's come back to just the ring and the star, just to kind of give us context around these 2 cards. So we're describing this man's sort of situation. So we looked at this, and that gave us, needing to sort of move toward a community. Now we have the ring and the star. So what does the ring suggest, and the star connected to him? I can share mine if that's helpful. But Liz,
I mean, I feel like it's a real lot of hope for a commitment.
Yeah.
In the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't get any closer in terms of proximity than the ring is to the man.
Yeah.
And the same with the star, then they're in that same line. And, to me, the star is hope and optimism. And then you've got that ring. So if we're just looking at that one column, to me, that looks really hopeful.
Yeah.
That he will find a commitment, in the next 6 months.
I agree. I think he's really hopeful for that commitment. I can't help, again, like these are the things that are really interesting to me about reading is like, I can't help but notice how the star then moves to the mountain. And so it's not easy, you know what I mean? Like the mountain is something that you have to climb, but he's so hopeful. He's so like into it and committed to like hoping for this relationship that it feels like that's a thing he could probably overcome.
But then again, the star is on top of the mountain, not the other way around. So maybe that's a good sign too.
Definitely. Now, if we're getting a sense like we've got too much information in the cards we looked at, like we don't have to look at these, but we can. You know what I mean? So like if we were going to look at, you know, kind of what's behind him, which is another thing you can do, like anything to the left of him can be behind him and anything to the right can be ahead of him. That's common too. I'm using the him pronoun just because the character is a dude. But... So we have fox, ship, and cross here. If we think about that as what's behind him, then it may have been sort of a like a situation where he took a wrong journey in the past when it comes to relationships. You know what I mean? Or that he's too trusting, he has too much faith that people are going to take him where he wants to go. And so he's a little naive, which would connect to the dog, you know, who's a little naive and trusting, thinking just that, you know, every person, every community is going to be a, you know, a great experience, you know, but the hope that he has can sometimes be troublesome, for example. And maybe at a certain time he was in a relationship with someone who he trusted who wasn't very trustworthy. So it's so fascinating to me, like how much you can get out of just a little, you know, and how many layers you can go. I also like, we're, you know, for all of us on this Zoom meeting and everyone who watches it later, like we're kind of talking through this slowly because we're experimenting and we're flowing and exploring and sort of navigating this. Like Camellia Elias, like I can read a grand tableau in 5 minutes and she'll do it. And I think there's something that's beneficial from actually moving relatively quickly, you know, at least at early, you know, early points of the reading. Because as we know, we can get kind of bogged down by information. So that's good. Let's sort of say, okay, we've got a sense of where this man has been in that circle and kind of where he's going. Like this is ahead of him. So we know, let's just say he has a tendency to be a little trusting. And, you know, I'm also seeing like, maybe he's also really kind of overly generous to people he trusts. So that's an interesting thing to be on the lookout for. So there's our kind of block of 9. So that kind of describes where he is, where he's been, and kind of his tendencies right now. So again, we're still working toward the question, you know, will he find someone to be in a relationship with over the next 6 months? Who can share just a place they think they'd want to go next logically?
I kind of want to see what's going on in her orbit, but I also am really interested in that middle row, what that connection point is between the two of their circles.
This here, yep.
Yeah.
So
I think it may be helpful to look at her first, though.
For sure. So this is kind of do the same that it did for him, looking at this box. So around her, in her row, we have letter and lilies. So what do we think about her?
Perhaps she's a little bit more mature than he is, and maybe is looking for, well, you have to contact me. Like she's not doing any chasing. She's a little above that. So that's it. It seems like she wants more mature, direct communication.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Lily, sorry.
She's pure, she has a pure, you know, a pure interest. So she's not the fox like the former relationship was.
And it's interesting. So we can start getting into intersections and things too. Like the fox intersects at the point of the coffin with her, which is kind of an interesting thing. Just to point that out. So there's a relationship there between the fox and her. So yeah, she's probably more mature. She has a more mature sense of, you know, of relationship. She's not the fox, so she's more of a grown-up. She's more trustworthy. The letter is always interesting to me. You know, I feel like it's one of those that's so sort of vague in a way, but you know, I think you sort of said, you know, just mature communication. She, you know, if we look at like directionality, she's looking at the letter. You know what I mean? So that's kind of interesting. I think like communication and just sort of like the ability to express oneself seems really important. Like she doesn't seem to want to mess around with, you know, nonsense, for example. And I'm just getting that because of this association of being sort of mature. You know, but the flow does go this way. What if we look at the sort of column here between, you know, lady, heart, coffin?
Perhaps she just got out of a relationship, and so her heart was temporarily closed off or safe, or continuing with that whole maturity concept that not to quote Tati Westbrook, she's cast a veil over the just the nonsense that's going on. So perhaps she's closed the chapter of her life where she's tolerating foolishness. Like it seems like she's like, even based on the imagery of her, like that whole ensemble that she has going on, like she seems like a woman who is self-possessed and has no patience.
Hmm. I definitely got the same thing of sort of my heart's shut out or closed right now, closed for business. And actually, the letter is something that has to be opened too, so there's an interesting connection there. So I felt very much the same thing. Any other thoughts?
So I don't, this is just one of those weird intuitive things. I'm looking at that, the letter, the coffin and the heart, and I'm thinking, ooh, she got burned on online dating.
Oh, for sure. And you can do the diamonds as a technique too. So then you could factor the lilies in there as well. And the lilies is a card of sex too. So, there could have been something there. I'm drawn to the connection between the key and the coffin. Because this, we talked about as being closed, this obviously can open things. So there's a connection there. It also creates a diagonal to the child. So, something new could be the thing that unlocks her heart. I want to go back to this row too, just to sort of talk a little bit more about maturity, because I think that the tree kind of bears out the reading of maturity with the lilies, because of course the tree is a very slow, mature thing. And so I think that that's another story that we're learning here, is that part of what's going to unlock her is not just something new, but the fact that whatever it is needs to be both stable, mature, fully grown. You know what I mean? So she's not gonna sort of be seduced by anything unstable. Oops. So how about this row here? Child, letter, and birds. Rather column, I should say.
It seems like the birds are in communication with the letter, just like how the lilies and the tree reinforce each other. It seems like she's open to new communication to an extent.
Yeah, there's like a nervous, like an excitement.
That's a nice point. Let's talk about that, because the birds do frequently get associated with anxiety and stress. But the other side of that coin is excitement, right? And so that's definitely a thing you could feel. The birds also have a connection to talking and communication. You know what I mean? And so like this whole row, I think, has a lot of layers, which is like, there's excitement about sort of connecting with something new, communicating about new things, being a little anxious about that, you know what I mean? There are other interesting things here too, which is like the child knights to the lilies. So there's a connection of like youth and maturity there, sort of like innocence and maturity. It also knights to the heart, so there's sort of like a rejuvenation there. The coffin knights to the birds, you know what I mean? And so anxiety about kind of opening up is there. The tree knights to the letter and to the heart. So just some really interesting things. So we have like a really interesting picture of who she is. We have an interesting picture of who he is. Of course, the question is, is this person in his future? And so I think this is a good time to kind of look at what Sophia mentioned, which is, was it Sophia? Or I can't remember, the row in between, was it Jules? The row in between. Because here we have fish, moon, house, and letter. So we have 4 cards that create a bridge between them. They're not super close, but they're not as far away as they could be either. So now we sort of want to look at, this to me seems like the bridge, the gap, you know what I mean? Like what would have to happen for him to connect to this person. And so what do we think about the relationship between these four cards?
It seems like he has to do some thinking about himself. Like the moon card suggests that maybe he has some things about himself that he needs to think about before he goes into another connection. Because the house there as well, like it seems like she's looking for someone who has a little element of stability there. And if we call back to that leftmost row with the fox, the ship, and the cross, perhaps he's someone who has a tendency to get really excited up front. And then once you face your first challenges or once things start to get tricky, he tends to have issues staying stable. That's a pretty common thing. So it seems like maybe he needs to do a little bit of thinking about himself and his values and what's important to him so that he can come in as someone who is presenting as stable to her.
How does the fish fit into that? I didn't quite catch how that played in. Sorry.
The fish I took as him, maybe he's a little bit of a player. And so the reason why he's moving on from his current community is that he's exhausted the current supply, is how I'll put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the moon is sometimes connected to reputation. And so if his reputation is to be sort of a, you know, the fish isn't necessarily a Lothario card, but it is a card of abundance. And so he could have a lot of, like if we just kind of do this and look at this kind of collection, he could have a reputation as someone who kind of moves on a lot, you know what I mean? Or present as someone who's always kind of looking for the next windfall, you know, and like that's his reputation. And so that's going to be an obstacle that he has to think about. So there's definitely that. What other ways could we look at this bridge? I get a sense as I'm looking at this of someone who is a little less stable than they want people to think. And I'll tell you why. The fish and the moon to me suggests that cyclical fluidity nature. The moon and the house and the letter are like, look, I'm stable, I have a house, you know what I mean? I pay my bills. But there's just this thing about like the fluidity of the moon and the fish, you know what I mean? And so, and she's, you know, again, if we're looking using directionality, he's looking this way, she's looking at him, you know what I mean? And so there may be a woman that he's interested in, but she's sort of seeing, okay, this is what he's showing me, this is what he's telling me, but what I see is this, you know? And so if there's like a thing here of like, this is, you know, you're writing me about your house and all that, but like when I look past that, all I see is your moods and your wishy-washiness. I don't know if that reads to anyone else, but it's like he thinks he's sort of selling something different from what she's seeing him selling. I don't know. I think she sees through him a little bit.
I also get like the intuitive hit that perhaps she's older than he is, or not even necessarily older, because that's the thing, like dating older people, sometimes an older person isn't necessarily more mature, they're just older.
Right.
So it seems what's going on here is perhaps she has more lived experience, or she's done more work on herself, or for whatever reason it seems like she's a little bit more together than he is, and she's just kind of looking at him and kind of weighing like, well, he's something new, but is this something new something that is worth me betting on or investing in? That's what it seems like. It seems like for better or for worse, he's maybe younger or younger at heart, or just isn't as established as she is.
Yeah, that makes sense. You also made me think of their points of view. And that makes me think of their priorities and the way that they see their priorities. I think, you know, if we can look at it as like they have shared priorities, but the order in which they're willing to achieve those are different. Like she's like, okay, look, I need to pay my bills. I need a place to live that's stable. And then after that, I can be kind of mercurial and just, you know, go with the flow. For him, it's the exact opposite. I need to sort of make money and be able to like, go with the flow. Then I can settle down and pay my bills. So there's like a priority. They have the same priorities, but they're in different orders. And so that to me creates conflict potentially. You know what I mean? But let's return. There's this thing we have to do whenever we're doing a big spread is come back to the question and remember what we're asking. So we're asking if there's potential that he can wind up in a relationship in the next 6 months. You know what I mean? It seems like there's the potential for someone to be there. But right now we're starting to see kind of a rocky connection point between the two. And now here's where we can start like incorporating the rest of the reading to tell us more. You know what I mean? So like, what is the man willing to commit to? What's the card that represents commitments, for example? We have the ring. So we're going to look for the ring and see where the ring sits and what's around it. You know, what we have just immediately touching the ring are the fox and the dog. So, you know, his commitment's definitely on his mind. It's above him. When we look at sort of what he views commitment as, I see a fox who's facing this way and a dog who's facing the other, you know, and that makes me think like, okay, so one of the person gets to sort of be a sneaky, you know, crafty Lothario. The other one has to be loyal and stable. You know what I mean? Like, there's just this interesting connection about like how he views commitment. You know, is he the player who gets to be the fox, or is he the loyal one who gets to be the dog who's going to be, you know, stable and home? You know, so we look for things like that. And then we look like, where is the heart? The heart is pretty far away from him. You know, so we have to sort of go all the way over here. It's closer to the woman, but she's closed off. The intersection point for him in the heart is the star. So he's hopeful. But again, there's a gap, actually the same size gap between hoping for what he wants and getting what he wants. And now we have cards here to look at. So we have the sun, the rider, the clover, and the birds. Which is an interesting combination. My sketches get so messy.
It's interesting the direction of the fox and the dog. Like, I feel like maybe if you're looking at past and future, the fox is how he's dealt with relationship before. Maybe there's more potential for genuine connection, given that the dog is kind of the direction that's facing the woman. You're trying to look at it in a more positive sense. I mean, even that sun, rider, clover, and birds. I mean, the birds can be challenging, but maybe that's that excitement component. I mean, clover is luck, rider is, you know, moving in a direction, and the sun is maybe reflective of that optimism of moving in a new direction and finding luck and excitement and connection, gearing towards that heart. I mean, that's the more optimistic look. It may not be, you know, all that favorable, but maybe that's how he's going into it.
Yeah, and I think the thing about the clover too is it can mean small, you know what I mean? So it can sort of diminish like what exactly is around it. So it, you know, usually it modifies the thing that it follows. So like this, the journey or the message would be smaller per se. So, you know, this could be like his hope kind of burns, you know, that he'll be able to sort of find someone to ride into his life, for example. But I don't know, it's also sort of like you start to tell yourself a story, and it's like you sort of have to keep telling yourself that story. So I think so much of it hinges kind of on this and how we interpret this and where we settle with this. I think, you know, the boxes were interesting in just terms of describing who they are and where they've been. But to answer the question, this journey is really interesting to me because it's like of the way that things kind of divide here. You know, so like this to me seems like the story I'm trying to sort of make sense of, however we interpret that. And so kind of now it's like, how do I reconcile the fact that sort of his priorities are here and his longer term goals are here, hers are here and her longer term goals are there. Like now I have to sort of figure out whether there's a way through that, or if it's irreconcilable. Also, it's helpful to know too, I would say, like I always say, context is so important. One thing that would be helpful for us to know is like whether there was someone who was interested already at the start of the reading, because that makes this different. You know what I mean? Like if there's a woman already or a partner already, that kind of changes how I'm going to read this than it does if there isn't one, because this person has to then arrive if they're not already in the scene. So, whoops, I did it again. Oh my God, we are almost halfway. We are halfway through already. Holy crap. All right, let's take a break for just 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll sort of finish this example up. Cool.
This is so cool.
Isn't it?
Yes, I can't believe it.
I'll wait for everyone to get back, but I was just looking at the spread and sort of answering the question.
Well, I just thought it was so interesting how that 9 box around the man and then even the one around the woman, really kind of look more positive. And then when you look at those cards in between, it's like, oh, but wait a minute. I mean, but then again, the question is, will he meet someone, not what is the quality of the relationship? So it's if you look at the question and that, again, the ring and the star, he looks like he might meet someone. Now the next question might be, and how will it go?
I mean, that's sort of the inevitable thing with these questions. Just because you meet someone doesn't mean that the relationship's going to be good. And that's the thing I always tell folks. It's like, anybody can be in a relationship, but not anyone can be in a good relationship.
Right.
And that's the weirdness of being an adult human. I thought it's sort of huge, but I thought I would show this. I made this bunch. I'm gonna have to turn the blur off. Crone. Whoops. Background. I made this like grand tableau board a bunch of years ago.
That is so cool.
It's just foam core that I decoupaged with like string. It's huge though. It's like totally impractical. But I hate reading on cloth. And they have a lot of like Lenormand spread cloths, but I wanted like something that was stable and wouldn't be like slipping around all the time. So I made this. I actually have a YouTube video about it, but I just remembered it this week. It was sitting behind the door in my office, so I pulled it out to show you. So welcome back from our break. What I was just looking at is sort of, we've talked about a lot of techniques. I thought, just for the sake of brevity, let me kind of show you what I might do to answer this question in this reading. And, just to kind of demonstrate how it might be done. And knowing that there's many ways to do it. So, I think I would sort of begin by looking, again, just assuming we're reading for a man and we use the man as the male significator, I am going to look at him. I am going to look for these 2 cards in particular, because this is the significant other, and the heart card is necessary too, because that's our love card. I'm going to look for the ring because that's the commitment card. And so these are the cards that I think are, kind of primary to me right now in terms of sort of getting a good answer to the question, right? So the man and the ring are connected, the woman and the heart are connected. That's a good sign. we kind of already interpreted around the man. We have a sense of who he is. We have a sense of this idea of commitment, to kind of use the less cynical outlook. I'll go with Jules' idea that this is sort of what we're moving away from and toward sort of a more mature and healthy approach to relationships. So he actually seems like he's in a pretty good place in a lot of ways. There's some stuff that he has to get over for sure. You know what I mean? I think that one of the things that this kind of suggests is he's going to have to put hope into action. He can't just hope that, hope will sustain and burn. He's going to have to do something and go somewhere to make something happen. I would say maybe at the tail end of these very 6 months, there might be someone who comes up who is a potential love match for him, but there is difficulty because their heart is somewhat closed off, probably from previous relationships, as generally happens. In order to bridge this gap, I kind of read this as a series of things he probably wanted to do in order to make himself attractive. So he wants to sort of stabilize his financial life, build a reputation, have sort of a good, home situation, and be able to sort of prove it and communicate as a grown-up. And if he can do these things or have these things by the time he meets this person, it's a pretty good chance that things will work out and they'll have a strong, mature connection. You know what I mean? So I feel like just reading these cards that way gives me the answers. So yeah, you could. This to me feels like something that's really important though. And so if you can't sort of demonstrate or prove these qualities, then it's going to be harder to win this person and open up their heart to you. And then I also will say, okay, there is an obstacle here. There's a bridge to be gapped, and so I'm going to look for other things in the reading that will help me think about solutions. I must use the word solutioning, which I hate. It's corporate consultant speak, and I've been hearing it all week. So I'm going to look for the card about solutions here. The solution is the key. The key obviously is connected to the woman, but it's very far away from him. You know what I mean? So that's a sort of interesting journey. I think his connection to his own heart is a little tenuous. I think he's maybe a little sort of more fairy tale-y, stuck on hope. And again, he's going to have to put this stuff into action. There's a little bit of luck that's going to come into play. But he's going to really have to make a connection to his own heart. Like that's the solution. It's going to have to be a strong, powerful connection to his own heart. And he may have to like cut out some of his old bullshit. You know what I mean? Like other relationships and maybe other like tendencies that haven't served him well in the past. So I kind of see that. I look at like obstacles. What are the obstacles? The mountain is our obstacle. It's sort of connected here to the flowers, the book, and the path. So there's a sense of like little gestures I don't think are big enough to get him over here. He's really going to have to sort of like study the map to find a way forward. So I mean that's just a really quick example of how I would do this really fast. But I think it gives us a sense of like you actually can get the answers you need, but you don't need all the cards to do it. I didn't really talk about this down here at all. So let me just clear the decks here. This bottom row of 4 can be read sort of in a special way. This can be considered kind of a key piece of advice. It can be considered sort of a like the future, like the immediate future. You sort of have to know what you want it to be going in your technique. Different readers do it different ways. So this might be advice because it seems like, yes, it's possible you'll meet someone, but there's a lot you're going to have to do to kind of make that sustainable or to attract her. And so, this row of clouds, towers, stork, and garden, maybe the answer to that, maybe he has to sort of, get through all his muddled thinking and really stand up, move toward this, this environment that he wants. So again, there's an action, that needs to happen. And there's, actions sort of throughout that need to happen in order for him to get what he wants. So that's like my quick and dirty version of reading it. Now, I think like any other divination, it's like to a certain degree, you have to rely on your own guts. You have to rely on your own instincts. I did a thing on YouTube this week where I did a video and I took 3 tarot cards and 5 Lenormand cards and tried to get the same answer to the same question, which in this case was, will the Biden student debt relief thing go through? And the way that I read the 2 sets of cards, I got the same answer from both sets of cards really organically to me. And it seems like the answer was yes. In comments, just about everyone who tried it and responded said that those cards said no. And as a reader, there's a time where like I start to say, well, I get pissed off that anyone disagrees with me because I'm an Aquarius rising and I'm always right about everything, always. But also just because, I did the damn reading. The reading said what it said. Like, if you disagree with me, that's fine. But that's not what the reading said because I was the reader. But the point isn't so much that. It's easy for me to kind of downward spiral and say, well, I guess I read those cards wrong if everyone else thinks that said no. But if I approach every reading I do that way, then I'll never get a reading done. You know what I mean? We have to trust our guts and we have to say, okay, I'm going into reading a spread of 36 cards. I'm going to have to give it structure and meaning somehow. And I have to trust that my intuition, which I view as the ability to interpret and recognize patterns, is going to guide me through. And of course, someone else will get a different answer because if we all had the same experience with the cards, then we would only need one reader. So, for anyone who, sees this later and watches my interpretation of this and says, oh, no, that's entirely wrong. This is the kind of thing that I find as a struggle for new readers in any technique when they go into like Facebook communities and they're like, oh, here's this reading and I did, and I think it means this. And then they get 36 comments that all tell them they're wrong. You know what I mean? Like, to me, the reader of the cards in any situation is the person who's interpreting them correctly. Anyone else may have wonderful interpretations, but they weren't the reader of that question with those cards in that moment. Mm-hmm. So that's my little monologue about that. But yeah, Liz and I were talking about, how much there is in this and how the relationships are so interesting. Any thoughts or any other sort of versions of interpreting this that like you might do or you want to talk about? Alrighty. Let's do, so I promised, I think I overplanned for, what I thought we could get done today. But that's fine because we can just talk more about it next week. And I think next week we'll again look at the card insets and we'll talk a little bit more about reading the Grand Tableau with houses. So we'll kind of spend some time using the Grand Tableau, in this case, as a general reading. And again, there's different techniques that you can use, but I think it generally will start out with a couple things that just make sense to you. So let's use, in this case, we'll use the woman as the significator since we used the man last time. But I will point out, in this case, the man is in a situation where there's nothing after him. And there's a lot of talk among different kinds of readers in Lenormand about what happens when that happens. So if you're using the male significator card and they don't have anything in front of them, there's a whole like litany of ways people react to that. And sometimes people will say, well, I can't read for you now because there's nothing ahead of you. So I have to not read for you now. It's not the right time. Or they reshuffle the Grand Tableau and do it again. Or they'll just read it and say, if they are doing like a past, present, future situation, that they're really stuck in the past, you know what I mean? And there's nothing we can really see about the future going into that. But that's just an interesting little thing. So there are also readers who don't consider what's behind the significators or in front of them as past, present, future. So these are all just, there's so many, it's like tarot, there's so many techniques. I think one of the reasons why I wanted us to do this too is like, tarot is kind of a melting pot in a way of techniques. And Lenormand, I think, draws people because the theory is that it's not, it is what it is. The good cards are always good, the bad cards are always bad. But when you look at every book out there and every reader and video out there, the meanings are so often the same, but the conclusions they come to are so different.
Mm.
And I think in part too, that just comes from the fact that we are all different. So my throat's getting a little dry because I'm talking too much. So here we have another spread. This one I did in the 9x4. So we don't have that little sort of button at the bottom. And this is a really old Lenormand deck that, let me show you the box. I don't know where I got this, but I really like it. It comes in this sort of oh, I cannot with the blur. And I turned my video off. Ugh, everything is the worst. All right, here's the box. And it's like this great little package, you know, and it actually comes with these old, like, Game of Hope thingies, and the cards. What?
I was just saying, oh, cool.
And it comes with like a book, but it's in German, so I can't read it. But anyway, I really like it. It just has a very like old-fashioned, but it's also very simple.
I like it too.
All right, so if we're going to do this as a general reading, we need something to sort of guide us through. And I think that's when I talked earlier, you know what I mean? Like the upper corner, the first 3 cards, reading the corners, etc. Those are things that can definitely work. I think for me to start reading as a general, I would look for our querent, you know, our significator, and just sort of see what's around them. This is a situation where, you know, we don't have a 9 card. There's nothing above them. So what we have is just what's below and on the side of them. So this is a general reading. I think what I'm looking for is kind of the state of affairs right now for this person. They're surrounded by the fish and the stork. And so I get a sense of migratory. They're feeling kind of migratory right now. And actually something about their, like, you know, their flow or their finances this is the mice. It's hard to see, but it's kind of like their sense of things is being kind of eaten away at. You know what I mean? So like the relationship between the fish and the mice is sort of like their finance. I mean, the traditional answer would be like their finances are a little unstable, you know, but there is a sense of wanting to move forward. You know, I could go this way because she's looking that way. And so like the migratory thing maybe wants to kind of look at these 3 cards. So they want to maybe like be around new communities, new people, and just sort of, this is the fox, not the tree. You know, get a little sort of dangerous, you know, in life right now. So I kind of, you know, as a reader would maybe start there. You know, that she's sitting on the sun, which is an interesting thing. You know, the sun is usually a pretty good card. So it would be like, you're actually in a really good place. But again, if we kind of take the journey this way, you know, the sun is kind of dimming a little bit. And now we have another migratory card. You know, so again, I get a sense like where she is, she's used to and probably should be liking it. But there's all of these, like the fish, the stork, the ship are all kind of wanting to move. You know, so she wants to kind of get away. And again, sort of the fox here just makes me think about, like, you know, again, getting a little dangerous, getting a little wild. It's not going to be easy though, because the mountains kind of intersect with both of those cards. So, you know, there's this desire to get away, but something is kind of keeping, or it's going to prevent them from doing that really easily. There may be a relationship that's preventing them from doing that, something they're kind of loyal to. But even then, like, that used to be really hot, but it's kind of being diminished. But it's still sort of hanging on to them. So like now what I'm telling is a story about someone who wants to get away. But it's not going to be easy, and maybe not even the healthiest thing that they're craving. So like that's really kind of an interesting way to begin with a general reading to see where she is. Any thoughts about that?
I feel like she could also be stuck in the past
Sure.
with that sense of directionality when
Mhm.
she's looking leftward. And there are all of these cards to the right and the lower, and well, not the lower, but yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely read it that way. So she, if we look from left to right, she is looking at the past. So this may be where she's come from. But she's focused on that and not the migration to maybe where she should be going.
Right, yeah.
So that's definitely another journey. And if we looked at it that way, then the journey sort of becomes stork, moon, letter, bouquet. And then this is the whip. I don't know why in this deck it's just a tape. No idea.
The other thing is that I feel like the fact that there's nothing above her is important, because it seems as though, like, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because she has so much going on for her right now, she can't think about anything very idealistic.
It could also mean that she's not really thinking clearly or thinking at all. There's sort of nothing on her mind, maybe other than this. Yeah, that's a great point. So that's one way we can start. Another way we can start is to think about different areas of life and focus on those. So we started by looking at the querent, or the significator. But let's say, they just want to explore some different parts of their life. So I want to know about my family. So in that case, I might look for the tree or the house, depending on what feels sort of strongly to me. There's one of the problems with having so few cards is you do have to make cards do double duty. But actually, in this case, the tree and the house are right next to each other. So there's a really interesting connection there. The tree is typically connected to health and well-being, and the house more typically connected to family. But in this case, they are really close. And so, we want to know what things are going like at family. So we're kind of looking here for the most part. But again, we also can kind of do this too, because the tree is there. So it's up to you. I think what makes the most sense right now is to look at the house and kind of how that's living. This is also where houses are helpful too, because what house the house is in could be interesting. Let's actually look really quickly. So what house would that be? The house would be in the house of the stars, right? Yes. So that's just something interesting to know. So stars, depending on how you read it, to me, it's sort of, it is to me, I read tarot star, what I learned from Lenormand, which was as a compass, kind of your North Star. But it does sort of represent hope too. It can represent, again, a lot of something or something that spreads. But I think here, just the idea of like stars as direction, and I'm looking at their family, like it seems to me like right now their family is their focus, their direction, their hope. You know what I mean? And so, what do we know about it? It's connected to the paths and the trees. So maybe, it was sort of a hard road getting here, but now it's pretty stable and it's growing. I look at the top row and connect it with the letter. This is sort of all good. So sort of above the house, the moon always to me feels more like cycles than the traditional thing is notoriety or reputation. That doesn't ever make much sense to me. But it feels like the cycle right now is pretty good. People seem to be communicating really well at home. That's nice. In the bottom set, we have coffin, bird, and book. So even though things are kind of seemingly like communicating really well, I actually get the sense that communication at home is somewhat closed off. Like there's something that people aren't talking about, and that may be causing some anxiety, because the coffin and the book are both secretive, closed things. And so kind of like underlying all this happiness is this sort of foundational secret something, and I can keep looking down to see what, what I mean? Like what the bird's on top of is the snake. So, the relationship, like the bird's going to eat the snake. So there's something sort of here that's like not good. The coffin and the star connected, the book and the cross are connected. And so what does that suggest? Like the coffin and the star, it's like whatever sort of like direction or maybe like goals is being kind of swallowed by the coffin because it's closed and they're not talking about it. And this secret, you know what I mean, is so kind of like they're so committed to the secret. So it's creating kind of a poisonous environment. So things at home seem like they're actually pretty good, but when we kind of dig below the surface, they're not quite as good. There's some sort of mystery here that needs to be solved. Anyway, that's how I might do that. But again, like what might you see if you were looking at this?
Is another interpretation of the moon card like deep emotions or like things that are buried deep below the surface? Because the idea of these things that are hidden, like there's a need to unpack or communicate about or somehow process some deeply held things that are kind of maybe in everyone's mind, and that sense of it being hidden and not really broachable with a coffin in the book. Yeah, there's that kind of reinforces that sense. And birds, right? Like that's all about communication, but it's kind of sandwiched between these two things that feel more restrictive. So yeah, there definitely seems to be something that needs to be processed or unpacked or discussed that's kind of been hidden for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just reiterating what you had just said.
No, that's, I mean, I love being validated, so thank you. Other things we can do too that we talked about is we can sort of look at intersections. So there is a communication connection between her and the family. So something here, and again, like looking at what house the letter is in could be interesting. What's the other intersection point? Oh, the sun, which is interesting. So like there's this connection between letter and the sun. It's almost like something in this closed envelope needs to be brought into the light, which again connects to this secret. So we feel like we're about to sort of do a Greek tragedy. This is where I do like the idea of houses, because I'm curious about the letter, what's in the house of the, or what house the letter is in. Let's look. So it's here. So it's in the house of the snake. So that's curious for me.
Yeah.
So that, whoops, wrong one. So that does sort of suggest there's something that's not being talked about that connects to the snake down here. So that's really interesting. So that's a way that houses can really be fascinating. And I think we'll actually have time to look at some houses in a second. Now, if I wanted to look at work, for instance, so we looked at family, what's going on at family. Now I can actually go and look at work. Oh, you know what? I can't do that because it's not going to let me undo. All right, those red lines are going to have to stay there. So when it comes to work, there's a couple cards that are traditionally used to significate that, the tower or the bear. The bear is traditionally considered to be a boss. That's why it represents work. It's also the mother card frequently. The tower is sort of like institutional things. So, you know, whatever kind of makes sense for you, you could use as your significator in that case. You know, if you were wondering what's going on at school, I would use the fish. But so if we wanted to know what's going on at work, just for the sake of, you know, for this reading, let's look at the bear, because that's fairly traditional. So then we sort of isolate the bear, and what do we see? The bear is with the ring and the clover. So it seems like this was kind of a lucky situation at work. That's nice. But the clover is always little, so it's like a little bit of a commitment, a little bit of luck that was here. And the cards above it aren't great, except for the key. So like the ring is connected to the cloud. So it's like whatever they committed to isn't super clear. And the job itself is, now there's a couple ways to read the scythe as cutting, which is traditional, or harvesting, which is to me more appropriate, but not traditional. This to me just gives me a sense of a boss who's very cutting, not necessarily the kindest boss. But it's maybe like a temp job or a short job. So like that's the key. That's the way out. I can also look at this relationship. Maybe one reason why the boss is cutting is because we're not communicating clearly, and the key is to communicate better. So that's another way you could do that. But really, it's just like doing little mini readings, within the grand tableau, focused on the significator cards. So let's say she wants to know about her husband. Her husband's here. He doesn't have much to look forward to, but he is part of the family, and he does have cards above and to the side of him, so we can read him. I'm in the way here. So lilies and heart connect the man card. So, I mean, that's nice. It seems like he certainly has feelings for her still, for example, or, it's been a long relationship. You could say that. He is connected to these secrets, though, and to the burden that it creates. So if the whatever this is definitely includes hubby. So I don't know. It's very kind of Greek, but I don't know. Thoughts? You're on mute, Liz.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of now reaching saturation point because I'm just seeing how much you can get out of this.
Yeah.
It like before we did this, I thought, well, it has to be impossible to come up with any kind of answer because there's so many cards here. But now I'm seeing that, if you just make it into a series of mini readings, it's really productive.
Yeah. To me, like, I agree with you. And like, to me, like, this is why I've been interested in these cards, because of this, because of the grand tableau, because this is so fascinating to me. And like, if you know me, how much I hate general readings. But like the amount of things you can get out of this to me is like really, like, I wish this were a sensible thing to do with tarot. It's just, to me, not, you know what I mean? Like, you could draw, cards to sit in the houses of the one. So you could have like the fool in the house of the fox, and you could do it that way. And Veronica Jude, our old friend Veronica Jude, does this with the majors. So she'll take a big major, the majors, lay them out in order, and then she'll shuffle the majors and put them on that and use the majors as houses.
Mhm.
So you could do a majors only reading that way, or not even majors only. You could use the majors as houses and then have the whole deck shuffled on top. But you can definitely do it. But I don't know. There's just something that's just like very sexy to me about this. I don't know why. Also just has a very fortune tellery feeling to it.
Yeah.
And it just makes me sort of want to have like a Victorian tea parlor, and Any other thoughts?
Not necessarily related to this spread itself, but when you're laying these out, do you just left to right down the rows?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there was like some magic science.
No, I mean, I haven't heard of any magic ways of doing it, but you might, you know what I mean? When I do the 9 card, I always put the middle card down and then the top left. So, things like that. I think there's a lot of options when it comes to that.
So I have a question about the clouds, and I don't know if anybody else has heard this, but I remember reading that, usually the clouds are like the clouds in this deck where there's a darker section. And so the cards that are near the darker section part of the clouds are going to be more negatively impacted than the cards that are around the not so dark parts of the cloud. Am I making that up, or is that a thing?
Nope, that's
I've definitely heard that too.
There's also a tradition in which the clouds dampens anything that's around it. So even if it's like, this does have the dark side, so that would make the garden, it's going to rain on your party. Now it's next to another bad card, so in theory that doesn't really diminish it much. It actually makes this card worse. But if it were, let's say, like the sun were next to it, the sun would kind of mitigate, based on the light here. But there is a school, actually it was the book I was showing you earlier, the I can't say his name, I'm so embarrassed. Boroveshengra, thank you, me. He says, like, the cloud is always, no matter what it is, the cloud's always bad, and it darkens anything that's next to it. So again, there's so many different schools of thought. I love the idea of nuance, and so I like the idea of the dark and the light side, but not all decks do that. I don't think this one does. Like this is actually my least favorite card in this deck. It kind of has a dark side, but not super. And they don't necessarily read as cards, as clouds to me immediately anyway, which is because I adore this deck. I love this deck. This is the maybe Lenormand. It just makes me very happy. But yeah, the other thing that I like about that deck is it's actually 52 cards. So it's called the maybe Lenormand because it has the Lenormand cards, but then there's the other ones. So there's additional ones you can use based on the orange. I think it's based on the orange box deck that I don't want to say the name of. But I love that deck. Let's talk a little bit more about houses, just because I think they are really interesting. So this is not beautiful like the cards we were just looking at, but it does serve its purpose, and for folks, who watch this later, if you don't have a Lenormand deck and you want to explore this, really all you need is a standard playing card deck. You remove the ace, or not the ace, the 2 through 5, and you just would write the name of the card on the corresponding card. So it's Lenormand is based on a PK deck, which doesn't use 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think I can't remember 5. Maybe it does use 5. So, like, when we're using the houses, it's interesting to see both where the significator lands and what is in the significator's house. So let's say that we're again looking at the woman as our significator. In this example, the black text is the house and the green text is the card that fell on that house. Oh, in this case, actually, the woman's in the house of the woman. So that really doesn't tell us a whole lot. But the man is in the house of the sun. So let's actually talk about that. So this, like we talked a little bit about last week, that, if we're doing a general reading, this gives us a little bit of a sense of the state that the man is in right now. And it seems like he's in a pretty good place. He's in the sun. Now, contextually, that might not be great. Like if he is standing trial, for example, the spotlight would be on him. So context is everything. So the man's in the house of the sun.
Wait, isn't the man in the house of a stork?
Oh, you're right. Yes, sorry. This is why it's easier to see the cards rather than text. You're right. So the man is in the house of the stork, which then suggests sort of a migratory thing. The sun is in the house of the man. So there's that's that connection. So the man's in the house of the stork, which means, he's sowing his oats maybe. He wants to move, he wants to migrate. The sun is in the house of the man, which may suggest, again, sort of what I just described. So the way that the houses work, does sort of create some interesting relationships, even as we sort of look at the cards around it. So if we want to sort of do the old 9-card situation, we can't do that because the man is here, but we do have cards around him. So he's got the garden and the paths up and below him. The garden's in the house of the flowers, which creates a really interesting connection. So if we think about garden as a community, it seems like a pretty good community. The ring is in the house of, this is confusing and why it's easy to use cards. The paths are in the house of the ring, and that's interesting too, because it sort of suggests like this idea of making a choice about some sort of like there's some commitment issue there. So like the way the houses work is interesting, but again, you don't need to look at them for every single card. You know what I mean? Like looking at where the man is can help you a lot, but you don't need to look that the garden is in the house of the flowers unless it just wants more information and you're curious about what it says. So, any thoughts about that as we kind of think about houses?
Now it clicks a little bit more because before I was kind of like, oh my goodness, information. But
Mhm.
now that I can treat it more as like a, if it's helpful, fabulous. If it's not, I'm going to keep trucking along.
Yeah,
It's a little bit less daunting. I still think for a little while, I may want to just have like a little cheat sheet to help me remember. And then I think eventually it'll start to solidify.
absolutely, for sure. One thing that I like, we started to talk about a little bit last week, is sort of like this idea of daisy chaining. So we look for our significator who's in the house of the stork. So now I look for the stork card, which is,
Paths.
what'd you say?
Straight across paths.
Ah, so we sort of connect those cards. So the stork is in the house of the paths. Now I look for the paths card.
Right underneath the stork. I mean, the house of the stork.
Oh, right. So we sort of go here. So now I look for the ring. And you can kind of like build a reading around that too. Just to see, okay, so the man's in the house of the stork. This describes the man as sort of migratory, which sort of connects to paths. You know what I mean? So the stork is here. So this kind of confirms that. Then we go to the paths with the ring. There's some kind of commitment issue at play. The ring is in the house of the house. So, you know, it's like sort of an interesting game to play. So then we look for the house of the, and basically you keep doing that until it lands in its own house or there's no more to do. So where's the house falling? In the heart of the house. I'm sorry, in the house of the heart. And then the heart. So like this is, you know, I don't have to keep doing this, but like the idea is that you can use all these different techniques if they show you something interesting. Or if you're not getting what you need, you know what I mean? Like if you're really stuck on what this reading is about, the houses can provide context. So it's really, I don't know, it's really interesting. But again, not all people use houses, which I didn't realize. This guy does not use houses at all. He says he just doesn't need to. And, you know, I mean, I like the idea of houses, but I don't think it's the first thing I would reach for. What I did do was sort of what we did last week, which was a 9-card spread where I drew Lenormand cards as houses and then put other cards on top of it. And I thought that was fun. All right, so we're coming up in the last few minutes. I'm curious, you know, just check in. This is a thing that like, I'm gonna save some battery and just turn off my sharing here for a sec. Did I make myself the host again? I hope so. Yes. So how, you know, I mean, this is a lot of information we're doing in a short amount of time, but the thing that I always ask during class is that, you know, I'm teaching, I don't really view myself as teaching, this is just sort of hosting, is like, how are we feeling? Are we getting out of this what we hoped to, what we thought we would? Is there something we'd like to see that we're not? Like curiosities, excitements, things we want to maybe even see next time in our last week together?
I really like the pace so far. I was brand new. I was like completely virgin to this. So now I'm at the point where I'm really like, I have my little flashcards that I'm making, getting into it. And so and I loved this class focusing on just kind of one topic, kind of putting it all together. But that's just my own personal take on it.
Excellent.
I realized that I knew more than I thought. I think I had this like Lenormand imposter syndrome that I was like, well, I don't know everything that there is to know about Lenormand, so I must know nothing about Lenormand. And so I think it was nice to just have this forum where we were able to just get rid of a lot of those arbitrary lines in the sand regarding Lenormand and how you can do it and how you can't do it. So I'm like, oh wow, I can just make it happen, just like tarot. Because with tarot, like I'm a self-proclaimed Thoth maniac, so I like rules and structure. I'm a Virgo. This is what happens. So it's kind of just like I can make my own rules and structure within the structure, and then it works out okay. I don't have to follow someone else's sense of rules, which is good.
Mhm. I think you kind of have to. I mean, when I look back on the last 25 years of my learning tarot and now this and Sibylla and Kipper to a lesser extent, you know, every teacher teaches the way that they learned, and they write the books the way that they learned. And the right way is the way that they learned because it's right because it's working for them. But that's not the thing for everybody, you know what I mean? And so, like, to pat myself on the back a little bit, one of the things I like to do when I teach is to try to make space for you to find your path through what I've learned. In this case, because I don't view myself in particular as an expert, you know, I've read a lot about it, but I've never found it really useful. I think the thing that I've experienced lately is to just sort of say, screw it, and let's just do it. Let's see what happens. Let's get an answer, you know, and that's kind of how I feel about every divination system now. And weirdly, I think the non-tarot system that I've had the most luck with is Sibylla, and I don't read that any way that any Sibylla reader would say is right. And there are very few books about it, and one of the two that I know of begins by saying, I am the only person who does this right. In order to really do this, you need to take my class. I will teach you the right way, but you can't be faffing around with tarot and Lenormand and whatever. You need to commit yourself to Sibylla, and anyone who doesn't do it this way is wrong. I mean, fine, if that's how you feel about yourself, but to me, that's not a super helpful way to go. To me, that's about the ego of the reader and not the development of the student. You know, and we all bring our different life experiences to the table and our own preferences to the table. You know, some people don't like doing predictive reading. Why should they feel that they have to do it then? You know what I mean? Like, some people, I love doing third-party readings. Should some mythical made-up sense of ethics stop me from doing it? No. I'm not stealing someone's credit card number. I'm finding out why they're acting like a dick. You know, I mean, that's sort of the thing for me. So you have to find your way in, and then you have to navigate your way through it in a way that makes sense to you, in a way that fits with your worldview, your cosmology, your sense of right and wrong. One of the best tarot readers I ever knew refused to do relationship readings, particularly around infidelity, because she just felt like, I have such strong feelings about that. I won't read about it.
Mhm.
She would have been dazzling reading about anything. She was one of the best readers I ever met. She doesn't do it. She knows her boundaries. I think that's great. You know, Liz, look, you're about to say something. Or not. I'm trying to unmute yourself. Can I unmute you? I can actually. Can I unmute? I don't even know if I'm still the host.
Last I saw it, I think I saw that Nancy was the host when you removed your iPad from the
Oh,
equation.
interesting. Nancy, can you make me the host?
Oh,
I'm not sure if I'm correct, but
No,
I
you
saw like
are.
a little.
Yeah, she's listed as host in the participants list.
okay, and I'm not sure how to do that.
If you hover over me, my name, there should be a little menu that shows up. Oh, you know what? I can do it myself. Reclaim host. Magical. Now, can I unmute Liz?
No, the problem, first of all, I wasn't even trying to talk, but
Oh.
somehow I
was so weird.
minimized the Zoom
Ah.
and yeah.
I could see a look of frustration on your face that indicated
Yeah.
that.
No worries. Other than, I just wanted to say that, I really don't have very much experience with Lenormand at all. In fact, I don't even know all the meanings for the cards. I've been, kind of studying that since we started the class. But I was afraid, really, I guess, or reluctant to try the Grand Tableau because I just thought it was just too hard and I was too overwhelmed. And so I just love that we just kind of dove in today, and that was just so helpful and so much fun. I mean, I think what I learned today was the grand tableau can really be fun.
I love that. A question I like to ask as we're preparing to end a series, of course, we still have one more week. We're going to meet next week. But I always like to just, I'll throw this out there for the six of us, but also for anyone watching this later, which is, you don't have to answer me, but like, what next? So, you know what I mean? Like, this ends next week. What are you going to do now? And I think like little goals are always really helpful, not massive ones. Like, I'm not going to like suddenly become Mademoiselle Lenormand, extraordinaire. You know what I mean? But like, what next? Does this become something you do a little practice with? Think about it. Because I just think like little learning goals are good, and they should, and I'm come from corporate America, like some of you do too, and in my corporate space right now, we're going through year-end reviews, and so we talk about SMART goals. And if you make your goals SMART, which are what? I always forget what the acronym stands for. It's like specific, measurable, action-based, reasonable, and timely. And as much as there's lots that I hate about corporate America, I think SMART goals are actually a good idea, because so often what we do is, like, as tarot readers or diviners, like, I'm going to become an expert in this system and be a pro in 6 weeks. You know what I mean? But just, little goals, little steps forward are much more achievable.
I actually use SMART goals in my tarot journal.
Oh, I love that. Another thing that I've stolen from corporate America is when I do readings, for some readings, I will have a section of the spread that is how do I check my progress, which is another way we come from corporate America, which I like for like advice readings, because we're not always going to be like forward motion getting it right all the time. So to have a method of coming back and checking our progress, I like. Oh, and another thing I like, just while we're talking about things I like in spreads, is what's out of my control. Because that is another thing I think that modern tarot has forgotten about, or modern divination has forgotten about. That we're not completely autonomous beings. There are things that are out of our control.
I have that built into my main spread that I do for my clients. I have that always baked into it. I use a modified version of the Golden Dawn spread. So I start it with a modified opening of the key, and just for the elements. I don't do any of the nonsense faffing about, because it takes too long. And then with the modified Golden Dawn reading, I break it into 4 quadrants. I do a past, present, future in the middle, and then I do most likely path, alternate path, which usually end up being the same thing in just different fonts. And then below it, it's what you can control and what you can't. And I feel like that is, at least for me, it's a little bit more tangible than a Celtic cross, because a Celtic cross, for me, sometimes it's really easy to get lost in the weeds, because it's like 12 different individual questions that may or may not relate to each other. Where I feel like the modified Golden Dawn spread, it's all around the same central concept.
I concur, and I am well known for my dislike of the Celtic cross. Although I do like the version of it I came up with, which is on my website, if you ever want to start it. All right, so next week, what do you think? I mean, I do want to talk about the playing card inserts a little bit, because they are definitely part of the deck. Do we want to do a little more around Grand Tableau and houses too? Yeah, okay, groovy. Last looks, last thoughts. All right, lovely humans, I will see you in 7 days, if not before then. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.